Hunger remains one of humanity's greatest challenges. The target is to achieve zero hunger by 2030. That's the United Nations goal. But the world is a long way from achieving that. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the number of people without enough to eat is rising. In 2020, more than 750 million people went hungry, maybe as many as 811 million, around a tenth of the global population. The worst hit regions are Asia, which has 418 million hungry, and Africa, which has 282 million hungry. Researchers believe the situation in Africa has dramatically worsened.
Drought has destroyed the harvest in southern Madagascar for 4 straight years. And sandstorms made it next to impossible to replant the fields. Bole has 3 children, as well as 2 orphans she took in. Every day is a fight for survival. I trust in God. Today, we have absolutely nothing to eat except cactus flowers, which we are trying to clean. The children here, their mother died, and so did my husband. The World Food Programme says acute malnutrition among children under 5 has doubled in just 5 months. In one district, a quarter of all children are malnourished. All told, more than 1 million people need help.
It's 7 times worse than it was just a year ago. 7 times more children are in trouble. Why? Because of drought. We're facing the worst drought in over 40 years. And this is an area where people depend on their own agriculture.
Northern Ethiopia has also long depended on aid. Last year, there was a plague of locusts, then the war. More and more people require assistance. But many areas in the interior, away from the cities, are inaccessible.
People have lost their assets, money. So people are still in a very vulnerable situation, trying to manage with the farmers, potentially with the few stocks that they had. We know that people are not having seeds to plant, or they potentially might be missing another harvest.
If the next harvest is also lost, people like this farming couple will also have to turn to the aid agencies. Across Africa, the number of those forced to flee drought, violence, and climate change is on the rise.
Let's speak to Cindy Holloman, who is a senior economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Thanks for joining us on DW Business. The UN set this clear target, zero hunger by 2030, but is that moving out of reach now?
Well, I think last year, 2020, created a huge challenge for us. We just came out with our assessment, which is the first assessment of 2020 since the COVID impact. And we're seeing that in that 1 year alone, we have up to 161 million more hungry in 2020. Now, that's an increase that's the highest we've seen in decades. I think the other thing that's really critical to point out is that last year also we saw across the board, not only in Africa, but in Asia and Latin America, increases in hunger. So definitely, we are now facing a much more difficult situation to meeting those targets.
And those higher numbers of hungry, are they attributable to the pandemic and its fallout?
Well, I think that what we're finding is that 2020 was a unique year because we saw the largest increase. And we also saw it across the board in all the countries. The main impact that it's coming from is the economic downturns in countries. And this is largely attributed to the COVID impact and also the containment measures. So where we see hunger spiking, it's because people have lost their lives, their incomes, and aren't able to access sufficient amount of food. But I would like to add also that where we see the increases the most is where it's combining with these other drivers that are already driving hunger, specifically climate change, climate extremes, disasters, conflict. So it's where you have this confluence of factors that's really seeing the spike in hunger.
And one of those places is sub-Saharan Africa, where we do have these economic slowdowns, droughts, wars. Can you tackle the hunger in those places without tackling those major issues?
Well, I think our main message that we're coming out with this year is that, climate extremes and climate, disasters are increasing around the world. And they're not going to go away in the short term. And what we're seeing is that's combining with these economic shocks, whether it's related to the COVID pandemic and the containment measures, or maybe it's a global financial crisis. So that's that coming together of the different impacts. So we really need to support a resilience in the economies to climate and also these economic hardships, so that when we get these combined shocks, which are creating more often, that we don't see these spikes in hunger. And what I'm talking about is chronic hunger. So it's something that's not going to go away. People have lost their livelihoods, their incomes. It's hard to regain, and that's our worry.
Is anything being done to regain that and to improve the situation, turn back this backward tide?
Well, I think what's happening more is realizing that we need to have this holistic approach. And really focusing on these drivers of the economic downturns, the climate, building in climate resilience, not only in Africa. Yes, Africa, we saw the sharpest increase. But in 2020, we saw 35 countries with the highest increases in hunger. And that was not only in Africa, some countries like Kenya, Rwanda, but also the Philippines in Asia, Sri Lanka, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil. So we can't think this is only a problem of Africa. And we need to really scale up our efforts for climate resilience in terms of all along the food chains, in terms of protecting and making sure that we don't have these problems of accessing food when we get these climate extremes. And then also the economic impacts.
Well, Cindy Holloman from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, thank you very much for coming on and explaining all this for us.
Thank you.